Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Man, okay. Just trying to be dramatic, man. Hopefully it's funny. Anyways, so I do have the round 9 Armageddon game between Wang Hao and Wesley. So it's a pretty roller coaster game, as you guys are aware. When they play the Armageddon, they try to be as they want the game to be as up and down as possible. It's kind of like when you're playing Bullet online. Some of you guys might know. Anyways. So for my people that are coming from the Philippines, 3:06 a.m. So I'll say magandang umaga, mabuhay to you, kamusta na, aking makaibigan, masaya kong makikinig muli. I appreciate you guys very much for coming by. Hello ulit. Thank you very much for stopping by, everybody. I appreciate it very much. Anybody who is coming from China, I would say ni hao and shishini. I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's go take a look, see what we have for this game. So we got D4, knight comes to F6, checking that. We do see C4, so we don't have a Berlin. So as you guys know, I mean, this is going to be like an up and down exciting game. We do see E6, and this is kind of like a branching point. I mean, you have like different moves you can play. You can play just like simply E3, you can play knight to C3, knight to F3, even some G3s in some situations, or A3 just preventing bishop to B4. But we do see knight to C3, and this is inviting the Nimzo-Indian, which is what we do see in the game. So bishop comes to B4. We see E3. We got castles by black. A3. Bishop takes C3. Pawn takes C3. But as I always say, we're not worried about, the pawn, the bishop taking and having this clump of pawns in the center of the board because, it's just reinforces our strength in the center. So, I mean, you got the F pawn, the E pawn rolling. You can do a little bit of damage. So we will see what happens. We got C5, the most logical way to try to shut things down. You don't really want to take here because you're going to be looking at this really gigantically ugly pawn structure. And this is just like really great for black. Basically, these front two pawns are just complete targets. There really isn't a good way for you to get rid of all of the weakness that you have with these triple pawns. So we do not want to go into that. So we do see bishop coming to D3. We see knight to C6. Knight comes to E2. We got B6 castles by white, and we do have bishop to A6. And then Catalans and like some type of positions. You do have this B6 bishop to A6 idea because you do have that pawn on C4. And a lot of times you can play like a knight to A5. Along with the bishop, and sometimes it's pretty hard to hold as white. Generally you'll see knight to come to F3, and then it'll back up to D2, and then that's a way for you to hold on to the pawn. But you don't really want to play just to be defending pieces. You want to play actively, right? So we do see E4, very logical move. Like I said, I mean, you have this really nice pawn center, so like why not start pushing it? Knight comes to E8, and you do have F4. And even though this looks really imposing, it's not just completely, you're not going to steamroll black. So, I mean, they definitely have ways to shut this down. But, I mean, it looks real nice, right? I mean, this is like the most dream case scenario that you have with these pawns, correct? So, we do have F5, and we do see knight to G3. Now, backing up, after we did see the move F4, something that could actually cause white some problems was actually knight to A5. And then after maybe something like queen to A4, the knight coming down to D6. Definitely can be some issues because we do have a lot of firepower on the C4 pawn, like I was mentioning before. But we do see F5. We got knight to G3. We got G6. Pawn takes C5. Pawn takes C5. We do see bishop to E3. And this is giving a nice little tickle on this pawn, so we defend it with D6. We got queen to A4. And then we do have the novelty of the game, which is knight to A3. But in this particular situation, even though we got this bishop A6 and knight to A5 situation trying to attack this pawn, we don't really have a great way to win it, especially because what I mentioned before with this knight coming to D6 is now not possible. And you have zero way to push this pawn. Actually, I mean, no, because then you got a little something, but you don't really want to push the pawn because you're going to be helping white, correct their pawn structure. Of course, you have to do something about defending this bishop because that is an issue. So you can't capture immediately. But we do see a rook A to D1, and we do see queen down to C7. We got pawn taking F5, pawn taking F5, rook F to E1. We see knight to F6. The knight goes down to F1. We see rook A to E8. Bishop goes down to f2, encouraging a trade, just trying to take over that file as well. The bishop comes back to b7. As I mentioned before, I mean, this knight and bishop hitting this pawn, it only makes sense if you could really win it. So, I mean, you don't want to just keep your pieces on the side of the board. So, at some point, you want to try to redirect your pieces back. So, bishop coming back to b7 puts it on a very legitimate diagonal. You are, much better on this diagonal with this bishop. So the knight does come to e3, and then we do have queen to c6. And we have reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video, and there is a move that Wang Hao plays in this position. It's one of two very necessary moves, but there is a very a real threat that is in the position. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can guess this move that Wang Hao plays. Okay, so, I mean, I think pretty much everybody noticed that this queen and bishop are trying to get that little cheapo checkmate, right? Well, the thing that's a little bit deeper in the position is, you have to defend against this checkmate, but right now the knight is just holding that square, right? But the problem is that black can actually, if you just don't do anything, let's say you just make like a lazy move, the rook can actually sacrifice itself on e3, removing the defender of this pawn, and then you are just like completely lost. So you have to do something to prevent that. So the one move that he makes in the position is queen back to c2. And of course, if the rook takes here now, this bishop will take, and then this queen laterally defends. It was also possible to go just queen takes c6 and just like literally just get rid of the problem. And then, black can start, trying to play against this pawn at some point in the game. So you had to make one of those two moves. If not, you're just literally dropping your knight for zero reason. So like I said, we did see this situation. The queen came back to d7. We see bishop to h4. Knight goes to h5. The queen comes over to f2. We do see bishop back down to a6. Not really threatening the pawn still. I mean, we have the knight and the bishop both on that square. So, we're doing good. And we do see knight up to d5. And this is a very critical point in the position. We do see king to g6. And I ask you again, I have another guess the move section. If you do want to pause the video and see what white can play here, is just completely devastating for black. Go ahead and do so. Okay, so I think a lot of you guys, whenever you did see this knight move over to the rim, immediately you should start thinking that the knight is grim on the rim, or dim on the grim, or dim on the rim. I don't know all the other sayings, but I mean, I know a knight on the rim is grim. That's how I know it. But the interesting thing about the position is the fact that you have both of these knights on the rim. So like how often do you see both knights on the rim? It's crazy. But anyway, there is a very real threat of capturing this knight. So if you guessed the move bishop to e2, you would be absolutely correct. There really isn't a great way to save this knight, and you are going to end up with a damaged pawn structure. It is suggested that you actually take the bishop with this rook, just giving up the exchange. But I mean, that is a pretty desperado situation. So if you did think, okay, I want to try to save the knight somehow, right? You're going to be looking at knight to f6. The bishop is going to take the check. You're going to have to give up the exchange anyway. The knight is going to take, the king is going to take, and then you have bishop to f3. And the problem is you have this queen coming into this square. You have this bishop coming into this square. You have this file or this, file that's basically just taken care of with this rook. So you have a lot of issues going on as black. So you do not want to go into that situation. After we saw king to g7, we did see queen down to f1. Just remembering this pawn and just trying to make sure that we have it completely defended. We do see rook takes e1, rook takes e1, and then we do see rook over to e8. And then we have bishop to e2 in this position. Now, it's a very nice position for white. It doesn't quite have the same bite on this knight as, you had before. And there is a reason for that. I'll get into that in a second. The queen goes over to f7. The rook goes over to d1. And then we actually see rook taking e2 in this position. This is just completely solid for white. We do see queen taking e2. And I mean, like I said, I mean, it's just really solid for white. But if we back up in this position, when we had the rook slide over to d1, you know, you had the ability to go h6. And you're not worried about the bishop capturing on h5 like the position we saw before, because after the pawn captures on h5, the queen comes up to d3, bishop takes on c4, queen goes to g3 with check. And I mean, you know, it kind of seems very active, but you are down a pawn as white. And the most interesting thing about the situation is the fact that this queen moved from f2 to f1. When it was on f2, when the bishop captured on c4, it was not like attacked. So when it was, when it did move down to f1, that is when it put itself in a square where it can be attacked. So as you can see, you know, leaving it there, the bishop was going to be taking here, and that is the problem that you have. So backing up to like what I saw, what I was saying in the game, the queen took e2, and then we saw bishop taking c4. The queen comes over to f3. So white is, I mean, holding the position very well. You know, they are down the pawn, but they have a lot of activity with their pieces. They have a really, really nice knight. This rook is doing a good job. This bishop is coming through. And so you have a lot of activity for your pieces. And like I said, these knights are on the edge of the board. So they're really not valued as much as they would be if they were more centralized. And I mean, black doesn't have a rook. So, I mean, you know, we do see bishop back to b3. We see rook up to d2. The knight comes to c4. So, I mean, black is starting to, you know, they're getting a little bit of tempi on white, you know, attacking things here and there. The rook does come to e2. We see bishop down to d1. And, I mean, that just stinks. I mean, this is definitely like, you know, kind of dropping the position just a little bit. I mean, rook to f2 was better. There really wasn't, I mean, a whole lot of moves that you can make in this position. I mean, because as you can see, most squares are covered. You know, you can possibly go up here, but you're just going to get attacked again. And I mean, it's pretty much just rook to f2, but it doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to put it there because you're just kind of like behind a pawn. So like, what's the point? So we do see, like I said, this and then this, and I mean, this does kind of suck because now your main strength was that you did have the exchange and now you don't have it anymore. So we do see knight up to e7. We see bishop taking e2, queen taking e2, the knight taking f4, queen going down to f1. We're trying to maintain like the attack on these two pieces. So the knight goes back to h5. So at least black has gotten their knight kind of back into the game though. So we do see queen up to f3. We got h6. And there's a very real threat of g5 coming and just disconnecting the protection of this knight, which is very real. So we have to do something about that. So the queen goes to b7 and protects this knight. We do see g5. Bishop comes down to f2. And then Wesley So has an idea in this position. And it is to, because this knight is currently pinned to this queen. So how can we try to take advantage of the fact that it is pinned? And it is attacking the knight with the king. So you have two options. You have king to f8 and king down to f6. One doesn't do what you want it to do, and one does everything you want it to do. The problem was Wesley So picked the one that it doesn't do everything for you. King goes down to f6, which might kind of seem like, hey, man, I'm attacking this knight. It's going to drop, right? But the problem is white actually has this saving move, knight to d5 with check. If you were to go king to f8, then there would just be a completely dropped piece, like 1000%. There's nothing you can do. I mean, you can try to check, but I mean, the king is just going to take, or you can go this, the queen is just going to take. The knight is completely gone, and you are just down an entire piece. So that was definitely the move that you need to play. But like I said, we did see king to f6, knight came to d5 with check. So, I mean, white is still completely, like, black is winning the game in this position. So it's not like, you know, it just like completely changed that. But it is much different. So the king goes up to g7. We see queen down to c6. Knight comes to f6. Knight takes f6. Queen takes f6. Queen goes to b7 with check. The king goes down to g6. Queen goes to d5. And, you know, let's tickle this knight. See what's cracking with it, what it wants to do. The queen does go up to f7. We got queen down to d3. And the thing about it is, I mean, Wang Hao needs to win this game. So trading queens, that's not going to help him do what he needs to do because he is down 2 entire pawns at this point in the game. So, I mean, you know, trading is just going to help, you know, Wesley So get a victory. So the queen does go to e6. We see queen down to d1. We got knight takes a3. So that is another pawn that just drops. We see h4. Pawn takes h4. Bishop takes h4. We got queen. We got knight over to c4. Bishop goes down to f2. We see queen down to e4. And I mean, this is just like a completely dominating position for black. Now, the thing about it is Wesley So just needs to draw. So that's all he needs to be able to, you know, just basically get his points that he needs. So the queen goes over to a4. We see a5. Queen goes to d7. We see queen to e5. Queen back down to a4. Queen goes to e4 again. Queen goes to d7. Queen goes to e5. And we're really close to actually like repeating moves. But queen goes to d5 now, so we change. Queen goes to e6. Queen goes to a8. King goes up to f7. Queen goes to b7 with check. King goes to g6. Queen goes to a8. King goes to f7. Queen goes back to b7. We see king back down to g6. And we have just repeated moves. So the game is drawn. And Wesley So gets exactly what he needs to be able to, you know, get his points that he needs. Because as black, you need either a win or a draw. And then you pretty much win the game. Which, like I said a long time ago, is weird. But, I mean, it is what it is. That's what they decided. So that is that. So Wesley So got his point. But he still trails the lead quite a bit. And today is the last day. So we will see who actually ultimately wins the tournament. So I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. And shishini for anybody coming from China. And I'll see you guys next time.